Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special Roosh Hour number 37. I am very excited to have with me a special guest, a man that I'm very humbled by because he innately knew something that took me 15 years to learn on my own. So today I have Dr. E. Michael Jones. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Roosh.
Okay. And I don't know how much of my arc you know, but I'll just give you a brief overview. Back when I was 21, I discovered the pickup community. At first, I wanted a girlfriend, but it was actually easier just to engage in casual sex with a lot of women. It turned into the default mode. And for many years, I pursued this in addition to writing many books and manuals that glorified this, that instructed other men to do it too, until I hit a dead end, until I could no longer increase the happiness or the pleasure I received from doing that. And this started in 2015, about 14, 15 years after I started. And one thing that the culture, it tends to tell us that we are like animals, that we are like monkeys and dolphins, that if we get the sexual urge, we should just pursue it. We should try to satisfy it. Sex is everywhere in the culture. There's nothing wrong, they say, with just chasing after the lust that you have. So I guess the first question for you, Dr. Jones, is aren't we just like the animals? Aren't we just like the monkeys with the sex drive that we should chase after?
Yes, we are. But there's a difference. The animals act according to instinct. Animals have no choice when it comes to sexual behavior. There's something called estrus in dogs. There's a cycle where suddenly the female is ready, it goes into heat, and the dogs have sex. Fish, a salmon, suddenly an electrochemical reaction goes off. They turn around, they swim back upstream, they lay the eggs, they fertilize the eggs, and they die. So the animals have no choice in this matter. The difference with human beings is that we have logos. So in other words, we have a soul that has three parts to it. Basically, there's logos, ethos, and pathos. There's logos, which is reason. There's will in the middle, and there's appetite at the bottom. And the whole point of a happy life is making sure that the bottom part conforms to the top part. So the Greeks had imagery, used imagery of like the horse and the rider. If you've ever ridden a horse and you don't know what you're doing, it can be a terrifying experience because the horse will take you where it wants to go and you can kill yourself. But if you have the reins in your hand and you control the horse, it's a happy experience for both the animal and the man. And that's the same thing with appetite. The whole point of appetite, the whole point of a successful life is to conform appetite to reason. You do that because you're dealing with another person, and that other person's destiny becomes then part of your destiny. And so I'm just reading Hegel, and his whole sense of the triad, the dialectic, is in a sense sexual. You are attracted to the other. Attraction means a desire for union. You have this sexual union, and in the sexual union, you confirm the other's existence, and the other confirms your existence. And out of this existence comes another person, and that becomes the synthesis in this dialectic. And that is the dialectic that is part of human history at its most basic level, at the cellular level, if you want to talk about that. And that cellular level is known as the family. And that's what makes us all. That's where we all come from. Now, over the course of what should I say, human development, we came to a period called the Enlightenment, and suddenly these forces were subjected to a type of mechanical, mechanistic, scientific, materialistic scrutiny. And at this point, the people realized that we're looking into it, realized that there was a power here that could be harnessed and used as a form of control by turning it upside down. which is exactly what happened. A revolution is turning things upside down. And so if you turn this upside down and you put passion on the top and reason on the bottom, this has always been a possibility. Okay, someone like Shakespeare would say something to the effect of, give me that man who is not slave's passion. So people always knew that if you let these appetites get out of control, you would become a slave. St. Augustine said, a rich man, though a king, is a slave, and the moral man, though a slave, is a king because he controls himself. And a man has as many masters as he has appetites. That was the ancient wisdom. It got turned upside down. So Augustine said, well, if you want to be free, control your passions. And the people like the Marquis de Sade and Wilhelm Reich and all these people you read about in Libido Dominandi said, well, if you want to control people, unleash the passions. And that was basically the insight that led me to write the book, Libido Dominandi, because I'm older than you. I grew up as a guinea pig in this experiment. I was there at high noon of the sexual revolution in America, which was the 60s. I was fortunate in escaping it because I got married when I was 21 years old. And that kept me on the straight and narrow. My wife was 20 and we escaped. I sort of watched it as a bystander. You know, I could see the collateral damage. I could see the bombs going off. I could see people dropping to the right and to the left. But I was saved from it because I stuck with my marriage. And because of that, I think I was able to understand it. And that's what led me to do that book.
When I read your book, Libido Dominandi, which I urge for every man to read, one thing that got me is that you knew what took experience for me to learn. And the thing is, you kept mentioning in that book that experience can be very costly. And it was very costly for me. And the fact that I donated the prime of my years into figuring things out that men like you knew. And a man watching right now can say, well, the things that Dr. Jones says is very good, but why isn't there anything in the culture, any of the messages being delivered to me that match that? In fact, like you mentioned, it's inverted. Everything is the opposite. Everything is trying to sate that lust that you have. So how did we get from where things were to the current year, 2019? And it seems like every level, every institution is trying to suck men and women into this lustful game of trying to satisfy their passions.
Yes, you're right. That's why you don't hear anybody talk about it, because you're not supposed to know what I just told you. You're supposed to be a good, docile sex robot, wage slave, and engage in, as I said in another book, transient, sterile relationships, because that's the best way the oligarchs can strip you of your labor and turn you into their slave. They know that. They understand it completely, and that's why they'll never talk about it. And so you're right. I mean, Ben Franklin said, experience keeps an expensive school, but fools will learn in no other. So better to learn in the expensive school than not to learn at all. And if your audience is men, I mean, yeah, you have an advantage because you have a longer, what should I say, a longer procreative career than women, and you have a chance to make up for it in lots of ways that women don't. I just had a conversation with a woman who contacted me through the internet, hadn't read anything that I've written. And she was exactly the epitome of every book I wrote. Okay, so she starts off in Boston. She's living on a street in Boston where every single person on the street is an Irish Catholic. And everybody takes care of everybody else. And she has this nostalgia for this place, and they get destroyed by ethnic cleansing. The blacks get moved in, become the proxy war of the oligarch to drive this person out. drive everyone out. They go to the suburbs and they are completely deracinated and cut off. And when you're lonely and you're subjected, what happens in the suburbs? You're not sitting on the front step playing with your neighbors or talking to your neighbors. You're watching television, you're driving a car. You're isolated. When you feel isolated, you feel lonely. When you feel lonely, you have this kind of sexual desire that you don't have otherwise. And she succumbs to it. And in her 20s, early 20s, she goes total full hog, whole hog, sexual liberation, 5 years, numerous sex partners, 3 abortions later, she's wrecked. She's damaged. At that point, she becomes a lesbian.
What I find,
for 14 years, she lives in a lesbian relationship now because she hates men. I mean, so the first book is Slaughter of Cities. That's described as destruction of a neighborhood. Second book is Libido Dominandi, which strikes how she was sexually engineered, and so on and so forth. That's the way it works. And so what the good news is that she woke up and she said, I finally realized what happened to me. The bad news is I only have one life. I only have one life, and I can't have children anymore. And what am I going to do now? I'm 50-some years old.
What I find the most unfair, what the culture is doing, what the oligarchs are doing to women, is putting them on the same educational and career timeline as men. So starting when they're 18, they go to university for 4 years or more. Then they're really encouraged to establish themselves, to get a career, to get that middle management job, and to not worry about creating a family until their income is high enough to enjoy first-class amenities in the urban environment. But the time she is established, and during those years she's doing that, she spent all those years focused on career, not on a man that she could love and have a family with. She wakes up at 28, 29, and now time is running out. Now I'm 39. There is still hope for me, let's say. But if a woman went on the same trajectory as me, at 39, there's no options. So do you think that they are targeting women a little bit harder than men because they know that women have this shorter fertility time span?
Well, I think that basically you're talking about feminism now, and the feminism came into prominence in the 70s. And I think the main reason it did was because they were the great untapped labor resource at that point. The Rockefellers, the big foundations, the oligarchs at that point were interested in driving wages down. The simplest way to drive wages down is to double the workforce, and you double the workforce by bringing women in. And so that's why there was this big push to convince women to have careers. Now, this was not just the United States. I mean, one of the great ironies is this happened in Iran. I've been over in Iran numerous times. I preached in a mosque in Iran. And I was there in the mosque. I gave the Libido Dominandi talk in the mosque. And, all the guys are sitting there on the rugs, and all the women are in the room in the back, and they're all listening to me. And I said to the guys, how many of you guys are married? About 20 guys raised their hand. Then I went down the line. How many children do you have? Zero. Not one married man had one child. And this is Iran, that basically came into, I mean, you're probably a product of this, but I mean, the Islamic Revolution was a repudiation of the great Satan of American materialism. The Shah was too much involved in the sexualization of Iran. They threw it off, and then here the same system comes back again. How did this happen? How did you create a nation of feminists in Iran? Well, education was part of it. And all of these women, all these poor women have spent all their time becoming nuclear physicists. And now they're wondering, when am I going to have a family? It's not fair to these women. My son, my youngest son is in ballet. He goes to the Cincinnati Ballet, gets a job there. He meets a woman. They fall in love. They get married. They invite everyone to the wedding. Okay. Well, this was a tremendous breach of protocol. Because especially in the arts, especially when you're in something ballet, you're supposed to be a good soldier in the sexual revolution and engage, as I said, in transient, sterile relationships. In other words, you're supposed to act like a homosexual, even if you're not a homosexual. So the retaliation, the boss, the big boss at the ballet, retaliates by firing my son and promoting my daughter-in-law. Now, if this isn't an assault on marriage, I don't know what is. And she retaliated by having a child. And she inspired all of these other ballerinas to engage in an insurrection against the gay lifestyle, even when you're a heterosexual. And the best way to prove that you're not a heterosexual, I guess, is to have a child. So 4 children were born out of this insurrection against this inhuman regime that has been imposed on everyone, but especially on women for the reasons that you mentioned.
You know, I've long said that dating actually originated with the gays in the 1920s. Gays couldn't go out, they couldn't hold hands with other men, so they would meet in these dark rooms late at night that served alcohol. And then after the alcohol was done, either they would engage in some activity there in the bathrooms there, or they would go nearby to a room, a private room. And that's what heterosexuals do now. So when you talk about sterile relationships, we're doing what the gays used to do. And it's no surprise that, like you mentioned when you were in the mosque, no one is having kids, even if they are married. Here's a fun fact. My grandfather, Iranian grandfather, he was a landowner. He had the maximum 4 wives and 26 kids. And my dad was one of those 26. He was the only one to leave the country, and he came to the United States, and he had 4 kids. And me, I'm 39, I have 0 kids. So you can see how the generations
here, you know. But as I said, you have an advantage in that it's still a possibility for you, you know. But that's the problem with women. They have a definite window of opportunity, and after that, it doesn't work, you know.
So what do you think right now are the main institutions or techniques that the oligarchs are pushing to draw men like me away from just the impulse, the instinct of creating a family and into this satisfying your lust urge and fornicating like a rock star? Do you see specific methods that are the most damaging?
Education. Education's terrible. Especially for the generation just under yours. Talking about the 20-year-olds. 20-year-olds are in a terrible situation because of education and because of education debt. Debt is the main thing prohibiting marriage among 20-year-olds, as far as I can tell, just from talking to people. Okay, this was the thing that was driving Occupy Wall Street. I was there. I walked the crowd. Virtually every guy was in his 20s, and he's holding a little card saying, "I'm $50,000 in debt, and all I can get is an unpaid internship." This is a terrible situation. This is a betrayal of their entire generation, and the result is they're being pushed in one of 2 directions: pushed toward homosexuality, because that enslaves you even more. I have the distinguished the honor, let's put it this way, of having the most famous gay mayor in America in South Bend, Indiana. His name is Pete Buttigieg, and if you ever wanted to understand the role the homosexuals play in being the proxy warriors of the oligarchs, look at Pete Buttigieg. He has created South Bend now, which was a family type of city, an ethnic type of city, a Catholic city, and he's trying to re-engineer it into basically the homosexual haven. It's like Berlin on the St. Joe River in Indiana. Berlin pioneered this with these narcissistic fantasies of like, you don't ask for a job, you're the next Steve Jobs. You can have a startup. Well, even Spiegel, and not a magazine I admire, said that startup is another word for low wages. This is all. So why are homosexuals so desirable? Well, because they don't have families and they don't have children, and so therefore they're easy to buy off when it comes to wage time, and basically say, sorry, we're not going to give you a raise, but you can always go to the gay disco and dance away your troubles. This is and they so you talk to this generation, and they, for the most part, they don't understand anything. So either they're homosexuals, they're heading off to the gay disco because they don't have a job, or they're in their mother's basement watching pornography, which is another vicious trap. That people are just people of their generation are just starting to wake up to. I talked to a 20-year-old just the other day. He said, we're the generation that grew up on pornography because we have these little phones, and we can access it instantly. And they know firsthand, as I said, we said before, in the expensive school of experience, you're a slave. And in a sense, that's a good thing. If you know you're a slave, then you know that you're missing something, and maybe you need to take steps to attain your freedom by getting rid of the things that enslave you. So that's the way I see this in terms of men.
A lot of men that I've talked to say that this free pornography, which they have high production, high definition. These are 3 of the top 10 websites in the United States are porn websites. I don't think that is an accident. I think that it's very available. It's like a soma that keeps men that when they get that impulse on board, they just load up a porn site and they play with themselves. And a lot of men through this experience and they have noticed that the agenda within the porn, what they're pushing within the porn, these sites are starting to recommend incest. They're saying this is the sister brother sleeping with each other. So this is when men started to wake up. Wait a second. They're using porn as just another method to corrupt me. In addition, when you watch the porn, then you see the women outside who are trying to mimic that too. So what can we do about that? I mean, how much can men block out when online and offline sexualized images, sexualized women are trying to keep their mind in the sexual realm?
I think it's possible. There was a time when I thought that this was so powerful that no one's going to break the habit. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's possible. I think in a sense it wears off. I think it wears off. And I think a sign that it's wearing off is that it's free. Why should this be free? Why is anything free? Well, because it's the government wants to promote it, because it's a form of control. Once you understand that, then I think you're on your way to freedom. Now, I am not trying to minimize the vicious nature of bad habits. Okay, they are vicious. They are very difficult to break. I'm just saying that it's possible. And I'm also not trying to say that I have some type of magic pill. I don't have a magic pill. I believe in a supernatural help. I'm a Catholic. I believe in that religion. I believe that religion was created to give you assistance, to get you out of situations you cannot get out of on your own. That's known as grace. And I think that's why the Catholic Church is there. So I'm not going to pretend that I have the magic pill and I can sell it to you. I don't. But I think you can find some type of spiritual help to get out of these problems. And also, there are people in the church who are providing programs, software, whatever you want to call it, that will help you break this habit. But the main issue here is isolation. The pornography leads to isolation, and you need to seek companionship as the antidote to isolation. And I know that's difficult now. It's difficult now because of the situation, but that's the direction you have to go.
I wanted to read something that you wrote in Libido Dominandi, because it really, I knew that sex was starting to draw my attention towards something, but it took me a while to connect how it's being used to actually control everyone. And you wrote, quote, once man is freed from the moral order, he is immediately subjected to the despotism of those who know how to manipulate his desires. And end quote. So how does being fixated on sex as a man, how does it help the oligarchs maintain their own power?
Well, lust darkens the mind. That's what St. Thomas Aquinas would say. We are rational creatures, and so we are distinguished by our mind and our ability to think. You can't resist an opponent when you're blind. If you look at the cover of the book, that's a portrayal of Samson. Samson was the hero. He was the strongest warrior that the Israelites had. And the Philistines couldn't beat him because he was so powerful, but he couldn't control his passions. And because he couldn't control his passions, he ended up blind. It's like a physical representation of what Aquinas would say 1,000 years later. She cut out his eyes. Okay. That's what you are when you're the slave of your passions. Well, how are you supposed to know where you're going if you're blind? This is the most graphic instance I can give you of this, or anyone, is from the beginning of Libido Dominandi. It's the Israelis pull into Ramallah, and as soon as they take over Ramallah, they start broadcasting pornography over Palestinian TV stations. Now, why did they do this? I mean, the standard American explanation is that pornography is freedom. No one's free unless Larry Flint can produce pornography. So the Israelis are bringing freedom to the Palestinians. Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? It proves that pornography is a weapon. If I ever needed proof, that's it. And there are people, I've given this talk in Europe. I've given this talk, various places in the United States and Washington. And times I've given it, there have been Palestinians in the audience. They come up and tell me, yeah, that happened. And it was worse than you said. It was worse than you said because there were snipers on the building. And if you went out, the snipers would shoot you. So that's what we're talking about here. You're blind. It takes skill to negotiate life. You have to, there's sometimes you want to start something, you want to do a business, you got to take risks, you got to make the right decisions. All of this stuff will be affected if you're addicted to pornography and lust is darkening your mind. You will not have a successful life. It's that simple.
I experienced my sexual peak in 2011 and 12. I was in Europe going to the nightclubs. I was finding girls who wanted to have fun in the same way that I did. And during this time, I had many girls in my bed. I felt like I was reaching some kind of peak, some kind of physical enlightenment. Now, if I encountered your work at that time, I would have said, oh, Dr. Jones, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This is everything. Bringing girls home that don't care about me and who I don't care about to rub up against each other for a short time and then go our separate ways. This is the peak of a male existence. Of course, that was wrong. I mean, you start to hit a dead end where you can't achieve that high of the girl you brought home a year ago. So what can you say to a man who is at that peak, a man like me in 2011, 12, who is experiencing what he thinks is the pleasure of the flesh? Is there any way you can throw cold water on him? Is there any argument you can use to wake him up?
Yeah, I think God had a plan for your life. And God's plan for your life was different than my life. I mean, I didn't do that. Okay. So in a sense, I can't talk from experience here. You know what I mean? This is not the fantasy that you lived is not something new. I don't know whether you've ever seen Don Giovanni, but there's an aria in there where one of the lines is "E nella Spagna mille e tre." In Spain, there were 1,003 women. You know what I mean? So you were the one that got to live that that fantasy out because God wanted you to understand it in a particularly existential way. It was bad what you did. It was evil what you did. But the whole point of human history is God taking evil and turning it into good. And he can do that in your life in a different, obviously did it in your life in a way that was different than he did it in my life. But the two of us, between the two of us, I think we can come together and we come to some type of conclusion. You from one perspective and me from the other. That's the way I would see it.
One thing that I read is that God gives you a specific vice that could be different than others, and he wants you to overcome that vice in order to get closer to him. So I think God gave me a lustful vice and the pride too, the pride to share that, oh guys, I'm traveling and sleeping around and I'm feeling my ego is growing. So he gave me these very two strong vices, and through overcoming them, and I believe I'm in the process of, it's actually put me closer to him. So you may be right in that this is the specific journey for me, and unlike say you who was placed on a different journey.
Right. You can speak with conviction about your experience in a way that I cannot. I can't talk about that. That was not my life. You know, my life was completely different. You would not be the first person who had to overcome lust in order to come closer to God. St. Augustine had something very similar in his life and talked about it in his Confessions. It's one of the greatest books of Western literature. So I'm saying that there is a big picture here, and that even that is part of the big picture, because this is the way God works in history. He takes evil and he turns it into good. That is the whole point of human history. And how he does it in your life is different than the way he did it in my life, you know. But I remember those days. I mean, back in, it was Germany for me, you know, and I arrive in Germany at the high noon of the sexual revolution. It's the 70s. I've tried to write, I've written about this, when everybody's going crazy. And I'm thinking, what the hell's going on here? You know, I've never experienced anything like this. And the fact that I'm married and have a child saved my ass from a lot of trouble. You know, that's the way I look back at it now. And yet I still had this kind of nostalgia for that period. So I wrote a novel about it, about what could have happened, you know, with me in the Bader Meinhof gang. The novel's called The Ratcatcher. But I keep going back to that experience. Why am I here? Well, you're here because you need to understand something. And if I had succumbed to those temptations, maybe I never would have understood it. That's the other side of the coin that we could talk about. You know, maybe you were destined to do something like that, and you fucked it up because you couldn't control your passions. That's a possibility too, you know, because I've gone back to it again. I was back I gave a speech in Germany in October. And I'm in Munich, and I'm climbing the mountains. And I'm talking to this guy who's also kind of recovering from the same thing you're recovering from, and suddenly wakes up to the fact that, hey, we're all slaves here in Germany. Germany is one big concentration camp now, and we're all slaves. And how did this happen? Well, it didn't happen all by itself. And so that allowed me to go back and examine that period before I got there. The whole social engineering of Germany that took place beginning immediately after the Second World War. The conquered people who were basically subjected to a full frontal assault on their sexual morality by the occupying powers. Every single magazine, book, TV show, movie had to get a license from a Jewish psychiatrist from New York City, who used all of those licenses to basically corrupt the morals of the German people. And I arrived at the tail end of that. That has had horrendous consequences for the Catholic Church throughout the world. The Pope Benedict the 16th just wrote an article about what really happened and how this homosexual mafia came to power in the Catholic Church. And he traced it back to the sexual revolution as he understood it in Regensburg in 1970. He's missing the point here. It was 25 years old by the time of 1970. You know, we have to talk about that whole thing. I'm just saying that my experience in Germany, again, I'm coming back to that same experience, understanding the depth and magnitude of what happened to an entire group of people, namely the Germans. I don't know whether you had much experience in Germany, but I mean, I've had a lot of experience in Germany. And I have you can't understand the situation now unless you understand the sexual revolution that destroyed that people as independent thinking group of people.
Now, a lot of the people behind the sexual revolution said this is about individual freedom. This is about humans being free, pursuing their instincts, and so on. But do you see this more as a spiritual war, in the sense of the people who are pushing this are specifically against God and doing this in a way to turn people away from him?
Yeah, you could like the whole chapter on Wilhelm Reich in Libido Dominandi is an example of this. That's just one person, a very influential person, but he was a communist. He was a Jew. He was a psychiatrist, all at the same time in Vienna during a crucial period during the 1930s when the communists were trying to take over the country. And he understood that I can't get anywhere talking to seminarians. He said, don't debate the existence of God with a seminarian. You'll get nowhere. But if you get him involved in sexual activity, then the idea of God will evaporate from his mind. Well, that's exactly what happened in the United States during the period that I'm talking about, during the period of the sexual revolution. That's what happened to the Catholics in the United States. They started acting on their sexual impulses, and the idea of God evaporated from their minds. That was the great triumph. That was the secret here of this the really vicious nature of this social engineering. Nothing can wreck you faster than sexual license. Nothing can screw up your life faster and more permanently than sexual liberation. And they know that, and that's why they promote it, and that's why they're promoting it to this day.
One thing you said in Libido Dominandi, which is true for me, is that you said you cannot masturbate and pray at the same time. It is very hard. For me, there's no way I can go to the club, chase after girls, and then come home at night and pray by the bed that I'm trying to bring them back to. Right. So why is that? Why is it that it's so hard to establish communion with God when you're actively rebelling?
Well, because you're rebelling. I mean, by the way, that is directly from a quote directly from Wilhelm Reich's book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism. So that shows you, just to show where that comes from. Why is that? First of all, because your passions are aroused. Your passions are shouting at you. You can't sit still because of your passions. You're there, and because the second part of it is that you're in rebellion. So it's not just that you're doing something and it's causing you to be agitated. You're consciously doing something that you know is wrong. And once you're consciously doing something that is wrong, well, why is it wrong? Well, because you know that there's a higher power out there that has set these rules, and you're in rebellion against those rules. You know that. This is the issue of adolescence is always a kind of self-consciousness. Like, hey, I am who I am. Why should I listen to what my parents told me? Okay, and there's a sense in which we have to go through this because you have to become your own man at a certain point. But the devil, if you want to put it in those terms, knows this too. And so the point is to get these people at this moment of adolescence and fixate them into a state of permanent rebellion through the manipulation of their sexuality. That's the world we live in.
When I was younger, the things that I would see as a beautiful girl, a girl wearing a sexy outfit. Now, because my orientation has changed, because I was trying to extract, I was trying to take pleasure in goods and fame and status from the world. And as that has now toned down, I go out there and I see that same girl in the same outfit in a different way. I no longer see her as someone that I should go after and crave. Instead, I want to keep away because I know that her display now is not just for me, but it's for every other man to validate them. So how can it be that in 1 year, I can see this as a truth, as a good, but then once the orientation changes, once you are no longer a slave to your lust, suddenly everything you thought was good was not true. And then and then you wonder, how could I have seen that as true? So I mean, how much can we trust the judgments that we make when we are actively trying to extract?
Look, you didn't get into this mess overnight, and you're not going to get out overnight. So consider it something like alcoholism. This already happened. There's a Sexaholics Anonymous. I don't know how effective it is, but they've already talked about it in terms of, overcoming an addiction. Okay. The point here is that you were recognizing something that was good. It is good. This sexual attraction is a good thing. Okay. But you have to bring it into line with reason. And reason says that you are there to find someone to marry, to get together, because if you didn't have attraction, we'd never get married. If we never got married, the human race would die out. So you're in a situation where you acted on it outside of reason, and that will have an effect on you. And that will have effect on your ability to think and your mind, and it will take time to get over that. I think it will take time to get over that, but I think it's possible. And so maybe you should think about your judgments. Maybe you're not quite thinking properly. Maybe you're still thinking like a drunk, even though you haven't had a drink. That's possible. And I've dealt with this. I've dealt with this before. I did a guy I was working with. He's going to become the big Catholic evangelist. His big crusader, and then suddenly his past catches up with him. And it turns out he was a flaming homosexual for his entire adult life up to that point. And now he wants to be the flaming Catholic evangelist and apologist. And he thinks he can do it. And I'm saying, no, you can't do it. I mean, to use the classical description, okay, the wound, the sin is like the arrow. Okay, you've been hit by an arrow. Okay, you go to the doctor, he takes the arrow out. So that's you go to confession, the sin is forgiven, but you still have a wound. You're still wounded from what you did. And I tried to explain to this guy, you're wounded. You have first of all, homosexuality is much worse than heterosexuality. It's much worse. And we don't understand that. Because we watch television and the homosexual couples are always the most well-adjusted people in the world. They never fight and so on and so forth. But it's much worse. It's much worse because it's against nature. Okay? So it's going to take you much longer to recover from this. And you should not be presenting yourself as some type of holier than thou crusader, because it's not going to work. And it's not working because if you look at what you're doing, you still have not overcome that fundamental narcissism, which is the essence of homosexuality. And you still got it, whether you're having sex or not. You're still not apprehending reality. You know what I mean? So he completely ignored me, blew me off. You can read this. I wrote the book about it. It's called The Man Behind the Curtain, where I go into detail about how you need to recover. This is why they called for a period of penance, so that your mind could recover, because if you're a drunk for 20 years, you're not going to just get sober overnight. You have to adjust. You have to learn things that you didn't learn during the 20 years when you were drunk. And that's the same thing I'm saying with sexuality, and especially homosexuality, which is a real derangement of the human spirit.
Now, they seem to be pushing homosexuality everywhere. I think for me, the turning point was when they lit up the White House in the gay colors. I think this was in 2015 or so. And I'm trying to think, what is the bottom of this? They keep pushing it. Now they're pushing the transsexual agenda, where they're modifying the biology of children by injecting them with hormones, subjecting them to various surgeries. So what is the bottom in the sense of how much further are they going to go? Because it seems like they're not satisfied with homosexuality alone. They're impacting the children, and they're trying to create a new species of man that is neither woman or man. Where do you
Right.
think this is
That's
going?
that's a war on essence. It's a war on being. It's a war on anyone who says that there is a nature, there is a logos to reality. The book I'm writing now is about logos. It's order, it's rationality, it mirrors the rationality of the mind of God. Everything in the universe has an order. The human body has an order. And what morality is basically a recognition of the order of the universe. It's called practical reason because of that. Okay. Now, when you have someone who comes along and says, oh, you can be free, you can do whatever you want, you can remove yourself from that order. Well, that means that you have nothing to stand on if you want to object to the people who gave you that freedom. This is why the oligarchs are pursuing this trend of thought. They will not stop. They will not stop until every single human being is their total slave and does exactly what they want with no objection. And they will try to destroy everything within their that stops them along the way. So the example in Indiana was the legislatures passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, okay, to protect the people of Indiana from this juggernaut that's crushing them. And immediately the CEOs parachute into South Bend, Indianapolis, and tell them, you got to change your law. Well, let's learn a lesson here. The point here is that these people, the rich, the powerful, the people who control our culture, the people who are promoting homosexuality, now saw state legislatures as an obstacle to their total dominion over everyone else. That was the lesson from that. The lesson of our gay mayor is that basically he's quitting South Bend being mayor because he can't get elected any place in Indiana. He's a total illusion. He's a total narcissistic fantasy that can only exist in the rarefied atmosphere of national media. And that's where he's existing. And that is his purpose, is basically to promote this idea as a form of liberation and befuddle people, to get them more and more enslaved. But to do that just politically, you have to bypass all the rest of Indiana. You cannot get elected anywhere because the people who understand are repulsed by what you are. But even if they don't understand it, you can't get elected one way or the other.
Now, it's a great thing that we are here right now having this conversation and people are watching. But at the end of the day, we may be a drop in the bucket in the amount of people who see the truth of what is going on. Do you think the oligarchs will win in turning us into slaves?
No, I think there's going to be a happy ending here. I'm a Christian. I believe that God is the Lord of history, and God cannot bring about a bad ending. We know that. There's going to be a happy ending here one way or the other. And I don't care. I mean, just my own personal experience here is suddenly I'm getting a lot of people all over the world who are waking up to the fact. The point here is it's consciousness. Once you understand that sexual liberation is a form of political control, you cannot go back. You cannot not know that anymore. And suddenly you view the world as completely different, and the world is a different place because now we know that. That idea is out in the open, and that idea alone will eventually destroy this project of social engineering.
Now, they are trying really hard to keep ideas that we are sharing from reaching the mainstream. I believe a figure such as Jordan Peterson was elevated to such heights to keep a man like you specifically down, to try to block your ideas from rising up. So they allow this non-offensive, somewhat anti-establishment man to achieve worldwide fame. Do you think that the efforts of, say, Silicon Valley and the media to keep the ideas that we're sharing down is going to work? Because right now it looks bad. It looks bad that they are censoring many people on YouTube, Twitter. PayPal is banning a lot of people. They've banned me. Amazon has banned my book. So on the surface, it looks like they're doing well. So how can we turn this around, or what are you doing to get the message out there?
I'm talking to you. I mean, they haven't presented that yet. I just lost my Wikipedia page. Thank you for taking down my Wikipedia page. It was nothing but SPLC propaganda used against me. I should have taken it down years ago. You know, I got one comment on my Facebook page. I decided to look into you, but then I read your Wikipedia page and I realized you're a jerk. So thank you for taking down my Wikipedia page. These are all instruments that came into existence to enable the spread of an idea. The main thing is the idea, not the instrument. You know, the main thing is the idea. The main thing is consciousness. You cannot do anything unless you're conscious of the situation. You have to understand the situation before you can act effectively. So the main issue is consciousness going to spread? And I'm saying, yeah, it is spreading. I'm telling you from 40 years of experience of beating my head against the wall, banging my head against the wall. When you starting a magazine, you know, after I got fired as a professor, and your magazine is a list of a couple thousand people that you send out a piece of paper to every month. I was fired as a professor, and I thought this was a terrible thing. It's the best thing that ever happened to me because it allowed me to be free to say what I wanted. And then I built up this magazine, and then that went. I mean, it still exists, but it's not what it was. And that goes down, and suddenly I have access to more and more people. It's just been spreading, and it's not something I did or could have done myself. So you're not alone here. You are on a river, and this river is called divine providence. And God has a plan, and you have a role to play. And you can deny, you can say no, or you can say yes. But that's not going to stop the river. You know, God knows from all eternity that you said yes at a particular moment, or you said no at a particular moment, and that river kept right on flowing. And you either played a part in bringing about the good, or you played a part in bringing about your own shame and condemnation. But that river is not going to stop. And that river is divine providence.